I'm going to start today's session, and it's really a fascinating topic, and it's about how to know oneself. We all know something about the self in different contexts. We hear so many teachers say, get to know yourself, or rise in meditation to realize the self. But what does that really mean at the outset? Because these statements sound completely abstract. A lot of us are left wondering, okay, yes, this is a good thing to do, but how? And this is where does one begin with the process of self-exploration, for example, in the material plane, or self-realization in the spiritual plane? These are terms we have heard, but where do we start? It's not an easy task, is it? So today, let us try to simplify both self-exploration and self-realization in a manner that helps us progress in developing a better understanding of both these states of our being. So let us also explore some simple approaches towards self-exploration, bearing in mind our own physical, mental, and emotional makeup. And then let us consider self-realization, which is a level above self-exploration, which offers broader horizons to the questions we have on the self. So that's our goal with today, and we can work with both these levels to find some fulfilling answers. Now, normally when I share insights, I usually start with looking at what the published literature says. But today we will skip this step, because there are so many definitions out there that we will only cause confusion. When I started looking at it, I go, no, this is not the direction we want to get to, which is simplicity. There are definitions out there of the self from a psychological perspective, social, philosophical, spiritual, and they're all different in nature. So we will stay simple and skip all these definitions today. And let us begin with a simple, holistic definition of the self, starting with the highest level, and then bring this understanding to the lower level of the mind and emotion. So let's start from the top and come down. And I would suggest that based on my experience and understanding, that the highest level of the self can be defined as the self is your unique identity. The self is your unique identity that embodies your life energy or soul and character. So the self is your unique identity that embodies your life energy and character, which is governed by all the knowledge that resides within you. So I'll repeat it. It sounds complicated, but it's not. The self is your unique identity that embodies your life energy. It makes you alive. And character, which is governed by all the knowledge that resides within you. Now, we will keep breaking this down. So this is the apex level definition of the self. And we can say that the self is indeed the true being that you are. Now, why do I use the word being? We as human beings, we are human beings because we can be, in inverted commas, in the present. To be is to exist with intelligence, consciousness, and awareness in the present moment. So by definition, human beings are beings of the present. Although the realities of our world take us away from the present and park us in the past or future. So when it comes to the self, remember, each one of us is totally unique. There are over 7 billion people in the world, and each one of us has our own unique fingerprints that no one else has. Isn't that a marvelous truth? I mean, no one in 7 billion people has the same prints as you or I. No one in the world, is equal from that perspective. And that makes each one of us so special and unique, doesn't it? So the self is representative of the unique identity of the being that you are. The unique identity of the being that you are. Now that's a nice simple way to view the self. And there is no other that is or can be the same as you. You are unique. That is yourself. Now let us dig deeper into the subject of the self with our dear friendly angels Cyrus and Luminous, because they have this amazing way of taking complicated things and bringing them down to very simple anecdotes and examples. So Cyrus and Luminous are sitting on a bench at the edge of a cliff, and in front of them is a vast, deep blue ocean. So edge of a cliff, this bench is there, they're sitting in front of this vast, deep blue ocean. And with them is a lovely young lady, Tara, who is struggling with life in this world. She struggles with low self-esteem, low confidence, and fear. Now, Cyrus has known Tara from soul stage. He knows her from soul stage. And hence he feels that between him and Luminous, they can help her realize that she is exactly the opposite of how she feels at this very moment. Her true self is the opposite of that. So at first they let Tara relate all her problems and fears and lack of self-worth in a lot of detail. And the two angels smile at her lovingly with endless patience as she relates her life's journey and how difficult everything has been. Cyrus and Luminous have heard this story so many times from so many human beings of our time. And once Cyrus was saying to me, it's a popular script, because this is what human beings of your time are actually going through. So when Tara is done, Cyrus asks her to close her eyes and follow him to a place where she will be able to see herself very clearly. And so he holds her hand and takes her on a journey through a thick mist on a steep mountain trail. So they're climbing up this mountain trail. The mist is very thick. Tara can see very little, but she holds on to Cyrus's hand, trusting that he will lead her through safely. And Luminous follows behind them to make sure if Tara falls, he's going to catch her. After a while, they break out of the mist and are back in the clear blue sky with rich green grass and a very clear turquoise ocean in the distance. Tara is awestruck. Everything is so beautiful and calm and completely still. She hasn't experienced such pure stillness before in her life. Then before them appears this beautiful, tall woman, radiant, with dark, silky hair and a truly radiant face, filled with love and warmth. She is tall, strong, fearless, and fluid. And her presence is absolutely heartwarming. And Tara is so taken in by her love. It's like a powerful magnet. But then she suddenly takes a step back when she realizes that the woman standing before her is actually her. She too is Tara, but such a beautiful, radiant being. Cyrus notices this and he holds Tara's hand and says, "Don't be afraid. This is really you. You are looking at the real Tara, your real self. The Tara before you is your crown self." Crown, like the crown you wear on your head. The Tara before you is your crown self. See how beautiful, peaceful, confident, and powerful you are? So Tara is totally awestruck. She said, "I'm so pure and strong, and yet I have lived my life feeling so unworthy and sorry for myself, so unhappy." Cyrus smiles and replies, "The Tara before you is the real you. This is your crown self. The Tara you believed you were until this moment is a creation of your mind, which is your slave self, your slave self." So Sarah takes a deeper look into her crown self for a moment, and she can see now who she really is. This was an amazing experience for her. Now, as she stands in her crown self, She knows everything about her journey as a soul. She knows her karmic compass. She knows why she's here. She knows all the universes that lie well beyond human vision. She has no need for imagination. She sees everything. She is so vast that her little human body could not possibly contain her. And she can be so small if she wanted to be, finer than the head of a pin. She's pure flexibility. She's pure peace. And she is complete stillness. Her crown self is totally still. She is timeless, eternal, ever-living. Her vision is endless because there are no horizons to limit her sight, like the horizons we know in our material world. When we look at the ocean, we see a horizon. We can't see beyond. She has no horizons. She can continue to see endlessly. For her crown self, there is no past or future, just present. Everything is in the pure present. As Tara looks at her material self from the position of her crown self, she witnesses how she came to be conceived in this physical form. While in the womb of her mother, as she develops as a fetus, she begins to absorb all her mother's emotions and all the energies of the people around her. Her father is very abusive towards her mother and puts her down all the time, eroding her self-esteem moment by moment. So Tara feels put down. Her mother is so scared of her father and his family, and now so is Tara. Her mom feels valueless and even once tries to kill herself. And now Tara feels worthless. Poor little baby, unborn yet, but she's forming, and she's forming with all this. But in those 9 months, the slave self of Tara is formed. And after she is born, she gets so engrossed in life in her very difficult childhood that she loses connection with her crown self. At least her material mind does. She becomes immersed in the slave self, which is so fragile, weak, scared, and temporary. The slave self has now crafted itself with such a powerful hard shell that Tara's crown self is left buried beneath it. She recognizes that the only way for her to break out of the slave self and reach her crown self again is through her power of thought, the greatest gift she has been given by the Creator. And that until this moment, she has been so immersed in her slave self that she believes that she is completely powerless. So as Tara stands in her crown self and looks at her slave self, she smiles at the realization that this poorly crafted slave of the material consciousness is completely temporary and weak. What a powerful realization. The crown self Tara now takes a big step forward. She occupies and takes full control of her slave self and resumes once again to be her true self, like she was just before conception. All the illusionary weaknesses of Tara, the slave Tara, are now gone, replaced by the real self, the crown self. Cyrus then says to Tara, "Today you have realized yourself. You have realized that your crown self is your true reality. The slave self will perish one day, but your crown self, your real being, will always be. Eternally, you will always continue to be. That's your crown self." And Cyrus continues, "When we return to the material plane, you will have to constantly remember and think of your crown self. Think of everything you saw just now. And in this way, your slave self will heal and reform itself, but now fully connected to your crown self, fully controlled by your crown self." So standing firmly in her slave self, what does Tara see? Remember, she got into her crown self. She had this amazing realization. She steps into the slave self, takes control. Now what does she see? She now fully understands the difference between her crown and slave self. She also realizes that all the people that torment her are in fact living totally in their slave selves, powerless and temporary. She now knows that the bad things they do are in fact creations of the material mind. For their true crown self is beautiful and pure, but just hidden and lost under the ocean of darkness that they have created for themselves in the material plane. She sees that even the worst criminals of the material world are in fact products of the slave self, turned very dark and mischievous. The slave self can become very dark and mischievous. Slaves that are completely out of control, these are the criminals. And yet, beneath each one of these seemingly terrible slave selves lies a beautiful crown self, powerful, radiant, merciful. However, fully immersed in the slave self, in the material world, these beings, their connection with the crown self has been lost. And it is actually a perceived loss, but they are so lost into it that they become the slave self. That becomes their reality. So I've said before many times, there's no such thing as a bad person. But what differentiates us from our higher self is this slave self, which is created by us in our material plane. So standing in her slave self, Tara sees that all the inspiration that she receives and all the creativity that comes to her originates from her crown self. And today she is blessed to have realized her crown self, which is eternal, timeless, and boundless, like that infinite ocean. She is deeply grateful that she can now be able to live within her crown self and govern the journey of her slave self from a position of purity and strength. And in this journey, everything she is to experience and learn will convert to knowledge. And this knowledge will keep flowing into her crown self, making it shine brighter and brighter each day. And as Tara looks at the temporary material world, she also recognizes that she has as much a right to everything in this world as everyone else does, including her oppressors. In reality, this material world has no privileged beings. Every soul enjoys the same rights to the resources, space, and experiences of this world. And Tara sees this very clearly, that everything in this world is actually pure equality, which is reflected by how everyone is born equal and dies equal. Tara can see that everything between birth and death are also pure equality. So how then has the material world turned out to be so different from its very own reality? Tara recognizes that the divisions, privileges, borders between countries, peoples, and diversities, restrictions imposed everywhere, and inequities of resource distribution are indeed the works of ungoverned, mischievous slaves. And for those beings who are totally immersed in the slave self, this represents their complete reality because it is the only reality they know. If you ask them what is real, they'll say this. But Tara can now see that actually the works of the slave self in the material plane, in the material world, are nothing more than illusions, because the reality of the world is very different. It is pure equality. These are all illusions, very temporary ones, which will all be left behind. And Tara can see that very clearly, standing in her slave self. So Tara feels so liberated now, for she has released herself from the shackles of all these illusions. And Tara now has everything back in correct order. You've heard the phrase so many times, life is just an illusion. Tara actually sees it. She sees what the reality is. She sees the illusion. She sees the works of the mischievous slave selves, totally out of control, who now have become that reality because that's where they live and that's the only reality they know. So Tara now has everything back in correct order. The crown governing the slave, and not the slave running free and being mischievous and destructive on its own. Cyrus smiles as he sees Tara so happy again after such a long, dark spell. He says to her, Tara, you see how your slave self has taken away so much joy from your life? Your slave self, is an illusionary being in which resides your ego, your pride and vanity, your fears, your joys and passions of the material world, which are fine, your memories of events and people that have shaped you, your perceptions of life in the material world, and so much more. This all resides in your slave self. And standing in your slave self, you now know that the slave self is not inherently bad. By nature, it is good, except that it is shaped by very low-level vibrations of a temporary material world, a material world where there is also a lot of darkness. And when the crown self takes over the slave self, it brings vibrations of the highest order to everything. Hence, your slave self, when correctly governed, can give you the most enriching journey in this material world, especially when it has constant access to the power and values of the crown self. So Luminous concludes this beautiful experience by summarizing for Tara that the crown self is pure uniqueness. There is none other like you. You are simply you, and none is comparable or equal to you. Your crown self is your reservoir of life energy, which keeps you alive in the material plane. Your life energy is pure and of infinite intelligence. Your crown self is eternal and timeless and has no boundaries. You are like that infinite ocean before us, he says. You have no limits, you have no horizons. Your vision is total and complete. Your crown self has a unique character derived from all the knowledge that you have amassed through your timeless journey, including what you have gained from this short material existence. Your crown self is ever growing in knowledge and wisdom from each event and each moment. Your crown self is the source of your creativity and inspiration. Your crown self is so vast that we will exhaust all human vocabulary as we continue to try to describe it. Tara's eyes are filled with tears of gratitude and joy. She is no longer the slave Tara that she was before she met these beautiful angels, Cyrus and Luminous. She is now once again who she has always been. Tara is so grateful to have found her crown self, but she has only one regret. Her crown self was her only true companion, who was always with her, even in her loneliest of moments. And yet, immersed in the slave self, she had ignored her only one true companion of her eternal journey, and lost so much of her material life without appreciating the precious being that is her and always with her. Cyrus reads her thoughts and says, "My dear, there is no reason to regret anything today. There is every reason to celebrate your self-realization. Today, you are one with your only true companion. You will never be lonely again. And that is ample reason for celebration." Cyrus continues, "Now it's time to head back." And as they walk together, Tara does not need anyone to hold her hand anymore. She is confident, happy, and fearless. And there's no more thick mist fogging up her path. Everything is clear, crystal clear. They are back on the benches at the cliff, facing the vast deep blue ocean, but now with complete clarity. For the first time, Tara can now see this ocean with no horizon to cut off her vision. She can see endlessly, well beyond the ocean. My dear friends, with the help of Cyrus and Luminous, we now have a clearer vision of the self. We know that our only true eternal companion is the self, the crown self. The very fact that we have discussed Tara's self-realization has actually begun to open up our minds towards exploring the self and seeking to realize the self consciously 24/7. Exploring the self means being aware of your real self in this material world, not just bouncing from event to event like an accidental object. Be aware that you have a crown self. That awareness in itself takes you halfway there. Exploring the self means using anchor thought, which we have all learned, to anchor yourself in a positive and enlightened state of being, because that is synonymous with your crown self. Exploring the self means seeking the extraordinary in the ordinary. Everything you see, seek its essence that lies beyond what the eyes can see. Remember, Tara's eyes now have no horizons. So as you begin to grow in this realization, my dear friends, your horizons will disappear too. And exploring the self leads to realizing the self. Because as you realize the greater dimensions of everything around you, your eyes will have shifted from the slave to the crown. You will be no different to Tara. And finally, through meditation, we can open ourselves up to seeing and realizing the self. Like Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, and I paraphrase, some people, through meditation, see the self, in the self, by the self. So some people, through meditation, see the self, in the self, by the self. Now this is a complex statement, but that's exactly what happened with Tara just now, with the help of Cyrus and Luminous. She saw her crown self, so she saw herself. And she saw the life energy or soul in the crown self. So she's seen herself in herself. And she made this discovery by flowing through power of thought, with the help of Cyrus and Luminous, from the slave self into the crown self. So this is what Sri Krishna refers to as by the self. So she used the self to flow into the crown self, where she recognized her true self. So when I first read this statement in the Bhagavad Gita many years ago, and I thought, wow, this is complicated. But then it made sense. And today, as we listen to Tara's journey, that's exactly what just happened. And all this becomes possible through meditation and through living a life with constant awareness of the oneness, both of which we as a group have talked and learned extensively over the last year and a half, almost coming up to 2 years. So this subject of the self is truly fascinating, my dear friends. And maybe we will do a masterclass series on this subject and go deeper and deeper together through each of the attributes, because there's so much more. I've just touched on the key points just to help point out to ourselves that there is the crown self and the slave self. Let's not live and be immersed in the slave self. Let's open ourselves up and connect with our crown self using meditation, living with oneness, and sharing this understanding that we have all just gained. So for today, I hope that some rays of light from Tara's journey have touched your crown self and begun to open you up towards a blessed journey of self-realization and conscious living with the crown self. So today we have taken the first step together. And seeing that we have a few moments, let me wrap up by doing this very short exercise of internalizing what we've just learned about the crown self. So I'd like you to just close your eyes and breathe freely. Close your eyes, breathe freely, and be relaxed. And we're going to go deeper towards our crown self. So the first attribute of your crown self is you are pure uniqueness. So repeat in your mind, I am pure uniqueness. I am pure uniqueness. I am pure uniqueness. Then the second attribute of yourself is you are life energy and its intelligence. So you repeat to yourself, I am life itself. I am life itself. I am life itself. The next attribute is that you are eternal. You are timeless and boundless. You are infinite. So you repeat in your mind, I am eternal. I am limitless. I am eternal. I am limitless. I am eternal. I am limitless. You have a unique character. That's your other attribute, derived from all the knowledge that resides within you eternally. So you repeat to yourself, I embody eternal knowledge. I embody eternal knowledge. I embody eternal knowledge. Next, you are ever growing in knowledge and wisdom from each event, each day. And so you repeat to yourself, I am ever growing. I am ever growing. I am ever growing. And you are the source of your creativity and inspiration. So you repeat, I am the source of all creativity. I am the source of all creativity. I am the source of all creativity. So with your eyes closed, you reflect on the self. You have just been through some of your attributes, and there's so much more. And you may open your eyes when you're ready. So you can see how special and unique you are, how rich, intelligent, and creative you are, how powerful you are, because you are life itself. You can now build an understanding of yourself from here. And this is the point where you can start to know the self by having a positive and healthy image of how vast, unique, and powerful you are. So please get in touch, connect with your crown self through your power of thought, through anchor thought, through living in oneness. Realize the self and let your crown self govern the slave self. Step out of the illusion, live in the real, and then work with the illusion to give you all the experiences of life and knowledge that you seek. So I hope you enjoyed this brief introduction into how to know yourself. And if you all think that this is a subject you want to dig deeper in, then I would be happy as we go along to set up a separate masterclass series for us to go attribute by attribute, technique by technique, some of which we already learned on how to connect with our crown self and live with our crown self.